Hello. So today we're going to be taking a look at the initial approach, the final approach and landing in the 737, and we'll also probably cover a few cleanup items after we land as well. So currently we are at 14,000 feet, we're currently descending towards Inverness Airport. So what's going to happen, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to reach these two green dots on the nav display here. And so what do these two green dots represent? Well, this is a deceleration phase of flight. At the moment, we're currently descending at 265 knots indicated airspeed, but what we need to do is the aircraft needs to slow down before it reaches 10,000 feet because there's a 250 knot speed restriction below 10,000 feet. So what will happen is once we reach this first green dot, is the aircraft will start leveling off and it will reduce the rate of descent to maybe 500 feet per minute or minus 500 feet per minute. Because the aircraft is starting to level off a little bit, the speed will start to bleed off as well. And what's going to happen is the speed is just going to bleed off down to about 240 knots. And then at the second dot, that's going to be the end of the deceleration phase. By the time we reach that second dot, we should be down just above 10,000 feet. And then once the speed is under control, then the aircraft will start descending a lot quicker again, and it will start continuing along the approach from there. So once we reach 10,000 feet, we're going to have a couple more items that we need to do. So it's not too much. All we need to do, as you can see by the little graphic on the screen just now, is turn on the passenger seatbelt signs. Now we could leave those on auto, but I explicitly like to have them switched on for takeoff and landing. But you could leave them on auto if you wanted to. Once you pass 10,000 feet, if the switch is in the auto position, then they will automatically turn on at 10,000 feet. What we can also do is turn on the fixed landing lights at 10,000 feet, so we'll do that. And then the last thing we'll need to keep in mind is to switch the barometric selector back over to the local pressure. Now if you're flying in the United States, of course the transition level is much higher at 18,000 feet, so if you do fly in the United States regularly, then just make a note just to change the order of items here. Okay, so now you can see we've just passed 11,000 feet. You'll notice here that the speed automatically gets set down to 240 knots, and you can see that the rate of descent is now reduced to 600 or minus 650 there. So you can see that the aircraft is starting to slow down. We passed that first green circle there. We're still following our ideal descent path there. We're still bang on it. You can confirm that on both the primary flight display and the nav display here. So the aircraft is slowing down nicely, we're still above 10,000 feet, everything is working as we want it to. So just going to wait a couple more seconds and then we'll turn on everything we need to. Actually, we'll probably do it now just to get it out of the way. So seatbelt signs, come on. The fixed landing lights can come on at this point. And as I said, the barometric selector, just be ready to switch that over to local. Now in the previous video, what you should have done is just pre-select the local pressure. You should have picked up an ATIS report or a METAR report to get the current weather conditions at your arrival airport. So you should have pre-selected that. If you haven't, then now would be a good time to just set the barometric pressure in. You can see that as I rotate the barometric selector, it sets it there. Because I'm using the fair weather preset, I'm just going to have it set to 1013, and then once we pass 3,000 feet, we'll just get a little reminder just to push the button and set the local pressure there. Okay, so we are now below 10,000 feet. Now we can have a look at the approach checklist, which is really not that complicated at all. All we need to do is just make sure that the altimeters are set. Now it's going to be a few minutes until we reach that altitude, so that's not a problem. We'll just make a mental note to change the altimeters, but we do have the altimeter set to the local pressure, or pre-selected to the local pressure, so we can kind of check that off and say that that's we're ready to do that once we reach the transition level. So now all we're doing is just simply descending down towards this approach path. Now if you are flying with air traffic control, what you will most likely end up doing is using level change, and that will be the modes that you want to use if you're being given specific altitudes to fly to. Of course, if you're flying using ATC vectors, they'll most likely be giving you specific headings to fly as well. So if that's the case, then move on to heading select, and then simply move the selector around to the altitude that you've been given. What may also happen is you may also be given a particular speed to fly to as well, so you may need to activate the speed mode there and fly to a specific speed that air traffic control has given you. So just be prepared to follow their instructions there. And if you are flying with air traffic control, just be ready, or just have your communication radios, keep tuning those into the next frequency you expect to use, and just be on top of that and be ready to switch frequencies when you're given instruction to do so. So now down at 7,300 feet. So what you want to be doing is, as you get closer to the airport, you also want to start dialing down the range there, because you'll notice that at larger ranges, now we can't see the airport, but all of these waypoints are really clumped together and it's really difficult to distinguish which waypoint is which. So as you get a bit closer, you also want to dial down the range as well, just so you can distinguish and clearly see each waypoint there. So you can see that we're now just passing the Gussie waypoints. As we do, I'm going to keep those good habits up and switch the heading indicator around. So not too long now before we make our left-hand turn and start the whole initial approach there. So what you'll notice here is, you'll notice that we have a green Dcell indicator here. So what we're going to start doing is, once we reach that point, the aircraft is going to automatically start reducing the speed. And what it's going to do is it's going to set the speed down to this up bug on the speed tape here. Now what we need to do is we need to start extending the flaps kind of in line with the deceleration. So once the speed has been set down, the aircraft is going to slow down. Just before we reach the up bug, what we want to do is set the flaps to position 1, and then the speed will then be set down again to the position 1 bug that's going to show up a bit further down. Just before we reach the position 1 bug, we're going to set the speed, we're going to set the flaps to 5, and then the speed will go down again, and then we'll set the flaps to 15, the speed will come down again. So that's going to be the next kind of order of action there. So once we get past that, the rest of the approach is going to be quite quick and quite hectic. What I may do is I may pause the video just so I can explain things clearly. But yeah, things are going to get pretty hectic from now on. So the next action here is we're going to start decelerating. So you can see that we're slightly above our vertical profile now, but it's okay. We've got good control of the speed there. The aircraft is recovering that nicely. The little white number below just indicates how far away from the vertical, or the ideal vertical profile, you are. So you can see we're slightly off the path there, but we've hit the decel, and you notice now that the speed bug has moved down to the upper position. So just before we reach that speed, I'm going to set the flaps to position 1. And then what will happen is, as the flaps extend, the CDU will automatically set the speed down again. So I'm just waiting for the speed to come down now. Of course, you can extend the flaps a bit sooner if you wish. Obviously, just keep an eye on the flaps limits down here on the placards, just underneath the landing gear lever. Of course, setting the flaps will induce more drag, so it's usually good practice to keep the flaps up as long as possible to save on fuel usage there. So 215 knots, going to set the flaps to position 1. And you'll notice that the speed bug automatically jumps down. So from the flaps 1 position, we skip position 2 and we go straight to flaps 5 there. You can see that we're getting close to turning on to our localizer there. So just keeping an eye on the speeds, just making sure that's coming down nicely. If we look out the window there, we've got Loch Ness just ahead of us, so these are kind of a visual pointer. Got the airport out there, so we're going to be making our turn almost immediately. So we're getting close to position 1, so we'll press once for 2, press again for position 5, and you'll notice that the flaps bug will skip down part way. That's where position 2 would be, and then it'll skip down again to position 5. So now we leave the flaps in position 5 until we're established on the localizer and that we have the glide slope active. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to pause the video here because there's a couple of things that I want to explain at this point, because from now on things get really hectic and a lot of things happen very quickly. So now that we're turning towards the localizer, what I'm going to do now is, now that we're sort of on a path to intercept the localizer, is I'm going to arm the approach mode here on the MCP panel. After I've armed the approach mode, what I'm going to do is arm the second autopilot, so Command B as well. Now, after that, once we're established on the localizer, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to wait for the glide slope to come alive. So we can tell when the glide slope is alive because if you have a look here, at the moment the indicators on the bottom and right side of the attitude indicator are showing us our LNAV and VNAV deviation. So that's showing our deviation from our ideal flight path as programmed into the CDU. But you can notice here that we've got a couple of white diamonds, and these white diamonds represent the localizer and the glide slope here. Now there's two different kind of things that we're looking for on the glide slope diamond here. Now the first one is when the glide slope becomes alive. So what that means is we should be lining up underneath the glide slope, and that's what we can see here. The glide slope diamond is above our current position. However, when the glide slope becomes alive, that means that the glide slope sort of indicator is going to start moving down towards the center. The actual indicator is moving. That's what we mean when we say the glide slope is alive. So when we see positive movements on the glide slope indicator there, we're going to set the flaps to position 15. Now I believe that when we set the flaps to position 15, the speed is also going to become active on the MCP here as well. So what we need to do is set the speed down to the number 15 bug manually here on the speed tape. When the glide slope is alive, what we're also going to do is we're going to also lower the landing gear, and we're also going to arm the speed brake, and we're also going to switch on all of the landing lights. And finally, if we have the ignition system, we're going to switch on the engine start switches. So there's quite a lot of actions which take place all within maybe 5 or 10 seconds of each other. So that's why I wanted to pause and explain all of those. Now the next thing that we're going to look for is the glide slope capture. So that's when the glide slope indicator actually reaches the center. We'll get a little green box here with G/S in it in this right column, which confirms that the computers have captured the glide slope, and we're now going to start descending towards the runway on the ideal glide slope path. So when we capture the glide slope, we're going to set the flaps down to position 40, which was our landing flap setting. We're going to manually dial the speed down to our VREF speed, which was 132 knots. And then we're going to set the MCP altitude to the missed approach altitude. And then after that, we're going to conduct the landing checklist. So as you can see, there's quite a lot that's going to happen in a very short amount of time. But now that I've explained it, hopefully you can follow along when we go live. Okay, so just get my view ready again, and let's go. Okay, so we're slowing down to a flap setting of 5 there. We're now on a heading to intercept the localizer there, so I'm going to go MCP approach mode arm, autopilot, command A and B on. So we'll leave the flaps at position 5 for now. Just keeping an eye on that glide slope indicator. So it's still at the top there. I'm not seeing any positive movement of it coming down. When we do, then we'll do all of those actions. So you can see that we've captured the VOR and the localizer there. We've got the little standard indicator there. So we'll set standard pressure. Okay, so you can see that the glide slope bug is now starting to move down. It's moved down away from the top there. So we're going to go landing gear lever down. We're going to set the flaps to 15. We're going to arm the speed brake by pressing shift /. You can see that we've got the green speed brake armed light there. Landing lights are all going to come on. Engine selectors are going to go over to continuous. I was expecting the MCP speeds to come alive there. Maybe I'll do a speed if it doesn't come alive there, then you can press the speed intervention button there to kind of manually take control of that there. Guess I made a mistake there. Anyway, we're just about to capture the glide slope. You can see that we've now got GS there. So we're going to set the flaps down now to position 40. And I'm going to set the speeds down to our VREF speed there. Now, if you're not sure exactly what the VREF speed is, you'll notice that the bug perfectly fits over the text on the speed tape there, so you can do that if you need to, without having to look back at the CDU to get the ideal speed there. Okay, so that should be everything set up. Now what we want to do is look through the landing checklist. So, engine start switches are both set to continuous. The speed brake is armed, we've got the green light there. Landing gear is down, we've got 3 green lights showing that the landing gear is locked in position. And the flaps are set to position 40, we've got the green light there to show that the leading edges are extended, and that's all good there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the autopilot and conduct the landing. Wish me luck. So to do that, what I do is I like to go over to the MCP panel, hit the disengage bar, and then cancel the alarm. So hit disengage, cancel that there. So I'm now flying the aircraft. Now while I'm flying the aircraft and I just disengaged the autopilot, I didn't disengage the auto throttle, so the auto throttle is going to hold our VREF speed, so we don't need to worry about that there. So now what I'm going to do is just follow the flight director indicators, just to try and keep me on the ideal descent path there. So now from now on I'm just following the flight directors, and I'm using the ILS indicators on the primary flight display like I would in a Cessna if I was doing an ILS approach in a Cessna. I don't need to worry about the speed or throttle settings because, as I said, the auto throttle is taking care of that for me. Now if you're interested in doing an auto land, I will cover an auto landing procedure in its own video at a future date, so don't worry about that. When the video is available, I will link it in the top right corner of the screen there. But for this, I feel it's a lot more interesting and a lot more fun, and you feel more involved if you perform the landing manually. So again, I don't need to worry about the throttle, I'm just worrying about following the flight director there. And now I'm going to start looking out at the runway as well, so to start getting a visual, because sometimes there is a mismatch between the kind of the ILS indications that you get in FSX and sort of the visual, the PAPI lights there, the white and the red lights there. So sometimes there is a mismatch, so I'm kind of now glancing up at the runway and glancing back down at the primary flight display to try and get myself lined up nicely there. So for the actual touchdown itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my physical throttle down to idle just before I touch down when I flare the aircraft, and I'm just going to try and put it down gently. As soon as I do touch down, I'm going to be hitting and holding F2 on my keyboard to enable the reverse thrust there, and I'm going to use a full power reverse thrust to help slow myself down. So we've got clear view of the runway, so we're committed to landing.
Minimums. 100. 50. 30. 20.
So throttle to idle.
10.
Just fly onto the runway. Reverse thrust out. Okay, so I believe it's at 70 knots. You can remove the reverse thrust there. So just hit F1 on my keyboard just to put my throttles to idle. Just keep the auto brake on there, slowing us down nicely. I'm now going to tap my trigger on my joystick to manually brake. What that does is that also disables the auto brake, and we'll just bring ourselves down to a stop. Well, not to a stop, just bring ourselves down to a safe speed, and we'll do a U-turn on the runway and we'll start looking at some cleanup stuff. So for doing the turnaround, you want to be down below 10 knots there, ideally maybe around 5 knots, and then give the throttle a bit of power just to help push the aircraft around. Now if you have a fancy throttle control where you can control both engines, then obviously use the outside engine just to help push the aircraft around the turn there. And then once we're out of the turn, I'm just going to reduce the throttle back down to about 23 on the N1 there. Or actually, I'm going to use a bit more power because, as I said during the takeoff, you want to use a bit more power just to kind of get clear off the runway sooner rather than later. Okay. So now we can work through some of the after landing procedures. So the first thing we're going to do is turn off the weather radar just by hitting that button there. Next we're going to go and turn the auto brake selector back to its off position. I'm going to press the speed brake button there to bring the speed brakes back up. You can see the light goes out there. Just going to cancel that auto throttle light there just because it's annoying. And then now I'm going to reduce the flaps, bring the flaps all the way up just by pressing F5 on my keyboard. You can see they come up there. And yeah, everything else we can do after we turn off the runway. So just gonna proceed here. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna turn off halfway down the runway and use this secondary runway at Inverness Airport. I am taxiing a bit slow here, so just gonna increase the power a little bit. Again, just to sort of clear the runway as soon as is practicable, as soon as is practical and as safe to do so. So just hit the brakes again, make a turn to the right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop on this runway to do the final kind of clean up items there. Okay, so now we should be clear and safely away from the runway. So now what we can do is switch the exterior lights as we need to. So all of the landing lights come off. If you were, landing at night time, you could turn on the runway turn-offs if you want. I will turn on the taxi light there. If we come over to the right side, we can turn the strobe lights off and keep them or put them back to steady. And what we can also do is turn the engine switches back to their off position. What we can do at this point as well, kind of a strange step, but this is what is in the PMDG's documentation. If I change my view here, what we can do is we can turn off the probe heat switches. So we'll turn those off now. Whoops, there we go. Sorry, the camera work there was really bad. And what we can also do now at this point is turn on the APU. So push that down to on and then start. And we'll get the APU started now as well. Also at this point, we can turn, now that we're off the runway, we can also turn the transponder. Now, if we're at a large airport which has ground radar, we can turn it to the alt repeating off position. But because Inverness is a small airport, it doesn't have ground radar, we could just turn it off to standby at that point. Okay, so that's all of the after landing items completed. Now what I'm going to do is just taxi down towards the terminal and we'll perform a shutdown, but that's something we're going to cover in the next video. So I hope you liked this video. Hopefully it wasn't too manic and it wasn't too hectic. Hopefully you managed to follow along okay there. So yeah, so the next video is going to be the last in the sort of procedure guide series, where we're going to look at parking, shutdown and securing the aircraft. So until then, thank you all very much for watching, take care out there, and I will catch you all later.